So I live in Toronto, and I used to work in this building, 121 Bloor. And to get there every morning, I would take the subway to here, Bloor Yonge. And then the exit is right around here. Yeah, you pop out of the subway right here. And then I would have to cross from here to get to here, this building. And if you look carefully, there's no crosswalk. So what are my options? I could either backtrack to Bloor Yonge. I know there's another exit here actually, but I never come out of that one. Or I could go to church, which honestly, neither option is that far, but nobody has the extra 2 minutes in the morning. So what would I do? I would just risk my life here, naturally. And I can show you a better picture right here. Cross from over here to over here. So that's not ideal. But I'm also pretty sure that at least 50 people in this building do the exact same thing. At least 50. We had 400 people in my office alone, which could be pretty powerful. We could somehow aggregate our thoughts together. And there isn't really a good way to do that in Toronto right now. If you want to request a crosswalk, you have to either visit someone or call someone, which is a complete non-starter in 2023. So I decided to make a cute little platform to do just that. That's what we'll be talking about today. So the first thing you see when you get to crossywalk.com is this map, and it'll show you all the existing suggestions. You can click on one of them, it'll zoom you in. You can copy the link if you want. You can upvote things. You have to log in, so we'll do that in a sec. And you also can search a specific location. I'll just do Cherry Beach, and it'll bounce you to it. There's also these tabs over here that'll fly you to different cities, but we can do that in a sec. So let's say we want to stick a crosswalk here. I actually haven't been to Cherry Beach in a while. So suggest crosswalk, you have to log in. And this just uses the built-in Next Auth with the Google service provider. So here, now it bounces you to the same spot after you log in. And we can add our own crosswalk, so I'll do that here. Summer is especially for families and dogs, something like that. And then we hit submit. It'll give a sec, and there it is. There it is. So 0 upvotes right now. I can upvote myself. I can go to my crosswalks to see the stuff that I've already suggested. And pretty simple, just a bunch of cards here. And you can also do things, I can show it on the map. I can edit this one. So let's say very busy. So that'll edit it. You can see it updates. If we show it on the map again, it'll update there. And finally, I can delete. So are you sure? Yes, delete. And then if I go back to here, yep, there is nothing at Cherry Beach. So that's that. One final thing I forgot to show actually is just these tabs over here. They'll fly you to the cities that honestly just where my friends live. You can go New York, London, and Hong Kong. So pretty straightforward there. So on the front end, I'm using Next.js. I like it a lot. And the site eventually is deployed on Vercel. And also use a lot of Tailwind UI components. So that is the one you pay for. And yeah, it's up to you to decide whether it's worth it or not. I find it very helpful. On the back end, I'm using a Postgres database hosting on Heroku, which is not free anymore. And I'm using Prisma as my ORM. Prisma is something I've used for other projects, and I just think it works pretty well, and I like it. And this map part, this is actually where a lot of the new things came in for me. And this is part of why I wanted to do this project, was to get some exposure to maps and Mapbox. And then finally, behind the scenes, I'm using the Google Places API. So this powers the search functionality. So that example I used, if you search for Cherry Beach, this API is what takes that query and then gives me coordinates back that I can then feed into Mapbox. So that's the tech stack, and I'm now going to jump into the code. So I'm going through the front end code first because I think it makes more sense. You can see how it maps to what you actually see with your own eyes. So this is a pretty typical Next folder structure. This is Next.js 13, but I'm not using the app directory. So you can still see your pages, my Prisma directory, which is where I define the schema, source, where I have a bunch of these components. That's pretty much it. But straight off the bat, I do something that you probably should not do because my index is actually not really in use. When you go to crossywalk.com, it actually redirects you to crossywalk.com/whatever location. This is some coordinates and then a zoom level. That's why this index.js is not in use, otherwise it would typically be. So that's actually a dynamic route here. And this is the real homepage, so to speak. The way I do that redirect is just in Next config. So when you try to go to index.js, it'll bounce you to this location, which is downtown Toronto. If I were to take this further, I would try and make this location actually the location of your device, which would be cooler, but maybe I'll do that later. So starting from index.js in location, this is the dynamic route. You see your typical head tags. There's a bit of a loading spinner, but this is the first thing I actually will dig into is this layout component. As you'd expect, stores the basic layout of the site. This is the stuff that really shows up on every screen. So mainly the nav bar. I think it's honestly only the nav bar here. So I just keep everything in this layout.js. And then here is where I actually have the real content. So in index, I pass this down into this layout, and here it is, this main prop, and that shows up here. Jumping back to this index, I do have get server-side props here because I want to do some work before serving the components. So first, I do some very dirty validation to see that the URL actually contains a valid location. It's not the best way. I'm sure I could find better ways to do it, but it's quick and dirty. And then here, I'm just calling the database to retrieve all the existing markers. And then I passed all these three things into my props, and then I can access them up here. So I'm going to go down the rabbit hole now of showing you how this page actually comes to be. From index, we go to places, and then from places, we have this map component. This is where the bulk of the map logic shows up, and it's a bit messy, but bear with me. So we have a bunch of states here to keep track of things like whether a panel's open, a pop-up's open, right? This is what I'm actually returning, right? This is the map. And you can see I have my on-move, on-click handlers, things like that. Then I finally have a bunch of these other components which control things like Crosswalk panel. That's the side panel that shows up when I want to edit something, for example. This panel is what shows up. The authorization modal, that's what pops up when I try to log in, and some other modals. So you can see that these are controlled by these states. That's why I have so many states up there of panel open, set panel open. Probably is a better way to do this. I was just going quick and I kept adding modals. So that's really the bulk of how this works. You have the index page, and then there's a subcomponent, which is this places component, and then there's a map component within that. That is how this big map screen shows up and how I get that data into there. So that's the front end, and I'll now go through a bit of the backend stuff. So this is what I'm using, this Postgres add-on. You do have to pay a bit of money now. It used to be free, but I'm using my GitHub student credits. So if we hop back into VS Code, this is my Prisma schema. So this is where I define, the schema for my two tables. I only have two tables. One is to hold all the crosswalks, and one is to keep track of the votes. The API calls are in Pages API. And the way I use Prisma in this project is here. I actually export this Prisma client. And what that lets me do is I only have to instantiate the client once and not every time I have to use it when I make an API call. Those API calls, they are sitting in Pages API. And there's actually a few more here than I need. I didn't end up using all of these, but an example would be create crosswalk. This is good. So let's go through an example of this one a little bit. I call this with Axios. I'll show you later. First, I just check that there's a session. I grab the data from the request body. Here is what I do. I'm importing that Prisma client that I showed you just now. And so I just await prisma.create, and then this is the data. I get the result. So it's fairly straightforward. Could do some better error handling here again. Probably could do anything better here. And this is called, for example, in one of my components, if I remember which one. Yeah, this was the panel that pops up when you try to edit or create a crosswalk. So this side panel, it actually shows up in one of the helpers, the handle submit. So when you hit this submit button, it grabs all the data in this form that you write down here. It goes to either create a crosswalk or update a crosswalk. That's how I use these routes. But I don't have a route for every time I need to actually call the database. If you remember actually this original index.js, I imported that client directly and I just call it a find many because the goal here is to retrieve all the crosswalks in the database. I'm not doing a specific query. So I found it easier to just include this find many in get server-side props. So I'll take a second here to talk about authentication because I just used this out of the box Next.js, which I found very helpful. What it allows you to do is use these built-in providers like Google or GitHub. I use the Google one here. So you don't actually have to handle user data, really. You don't have to handle saving emails, saving passwords. There are upsides and downsides. For a project like this, where I'm trying to just get something out, go quickly, I found it super simple. What I did there is under API, Pages API, there's this little provider setup. There are plenty of guides out there. I just followed one of them. And this Next.auth is something that I import in other components or pages. This My Crosswalks page, for example. So that's where you can see your crosswalks. And you use it in get server-side props to just get information about the current session. That's how I did that. And honestly, all this backend database stuff took me a second to figure out. The way I have it set up here, it works for small scale projects. If you want to scale something further, it probably is not the best way. I'm not doing things like the roots in the most efficient way. And it's probably also not the most secure. But we'll move on. And we are into our final big section, which is all this map business. And this was interesting. This was a good learning experience for me. So if you want to play with maps, then I will try and give you some knowledge here. This part was also a little bit annoying because you had to read docs, but maybe I don't actually need to read docs anymore. This is my first time using Mapbox, so I definitely still have a lot to learn, but it was just super smooth, straightforward, and satisfying to use, honestly. So I didn't use Mapbox straight out of the box. I used React Map GL, which makes it even easier to use Mapbox with React. They have pretty good docs. You'll probably be able to figure stuff out, and there's a decent amount on Stack Overflow or Reddit already. And I'm gonna pop back into the map component because that is this map that you see here. So looking at map, I'll just go through everything we have here. I have an onMove helper, which just handles the dragging aspect of it. You can see how it's taking the event and it's setting the view state. It's just updating that. So I can drag around, zoom in, zoom out. My map style, this is a custom map style, which Mapbox is pretty good in this. I can go into more detail in another time perhaps, but you can make these custom map styles and control what you see on the map. So what I did, because this is a web app about crosswalk suggestions, is I kept the crosswalks here and I removed things like subway labels, for example, or there's an option to show the streetcar tracks. Makes more sense on Spadina. To show the streetcar tracks, I took those out. So keeping the crosswalks and some minimal labeling in. So I really like that about Mapbox. They make that super easy. An access token, pretty simple. An on-click handler. So this is, oh, never mind. Handle click. There's just some small manipulation on when I hit suggest crosswalk, I want to see a crosshair. If I cancel, then it goes back to a pointer. And on load, right, this is just when the map loads. That's how I control the spinner. So it stops spinning when the map loads and then I load everything at the same time. And then finally I have, the way I did this pop-up, I talked a bit about it briefly, but pop-up info is something that I'm storing in state. And so when you select a crosswalk, it sets pop-up info right here with the information of this marker. And so then pop-up info is no longer null. And so then this pop-up component is rendered. And yeah, I could probably clean this up a little bit. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. And then I finally have within each pop-up this heart icon, and then there's handlers for the upvotes there. And handle upvote is what controls whether this is the vote counter and also whether this is red or not. And what I'm doing here is I'm calling, more routes, the upvote and the downvote crosswalk API route. So that is honestly it for the map. I can elaborate on this more because I did learn quite a bit trying to figure this out. If anyone's interested, if anyone even watches this, I don't know if anyone will watch it. But yeah, that's it for the map. I will quickly go over this location search because it requires fiddling around with the Google Maps API. As a reminder, this is the search box here, so you can just jump to specific places. And what I am using here behind the scenes is the Google Places API, and specifically Place Search, I believe. Places autocomplete, never mind, Places autocomplete. So what I'm doing with this autocomplete API is that as I type, it will give me suggestions to autocomplete my search term. And then once I hit enter or search, it takes that string, and because it's auto-completed, it converts that string into coordinates, and I access those coordinates with this handler in my search box component, this handle select, which gives me the result. I geocode the address, I get the latitude and longitude from those results, and then this set selected is a function that I pass into this search box. So if you notice here, set selected is a prop, and I'm keeping track of that here. It's a little confusing. Again, could probably do it better, but end result is when I search, it auto completes it for me. When I search it, I can grab that result. I can pass it back up from the search box component into the map component, and that's how I control where to fly to on the map. So I got lazy with the tripod setup, and I'll just do the conclusion this way. This isn't a big project, but I had quite a bit of fun making it, and there are definitely a ton of things that can be improved, especially on the database side. If this were a real thing up and running, the first thing is probably to just cache the existing markers so you're not retrieving it on every page load. You notice that was a little bit slow. So yeah, I'm not sure if anyone will actually watch this or if it'll just stay as part of my portfolio. If people do watch it and you want to see more of anything in here that's worth elaborating on, let me know. And yeah, go check it out, crossywalk.com. You can leave some crosswalk suggestions in your own city perhaps. And thanks for watching.